The Omega collapsed in the courtyard, armor scattering as blood seeped through her dress. Every wolf stared, waiting for her to fail again like she always did. What she didn't know was that her Alpha King had been watching from the shadows. And he hadn't looked away since. The metallic clang of steel against steel echoed across the training grounds as Alpha King Kalen Blackwood delivered a crushing blow to his sparring partner. Sweat glistened on his bronzed chest, his dark hair tousled from the morning's brutal session. At 28, he was the youngest Alpha King in centuries, and his pack's dominance across the Northern Territories proved why. Again, Kalen commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an alpha. The young warrior before him paled but raised his sword once more. It was then that Kalen caught sight of her, limping across the courtyard with his ceremonial armor balanced precariously in her arms. Lyra Mason, his personal maid, struggled with each step, her left leg dragging slightly behind her right. Her shoulder-length auburn hair fell like a curtain across her face, but he could see the tight line of her lips as she fought against obvious pain. The sight made his wolf stir restlessly beneath his skin. "Hold," Kalen barked to his sparring partner, dropping his sword without a second glance. Every wolf in the courtyard froze as their Alpha King stalked toward the limping Omega. Lyra's head snapped up at his approach, her green eyes widening with what looked like fear. She was beautiful in that quiet, understated way that made men look twice. High cheekbones, full lips, and skin that looked like it had never seen enough sunlight. But right now, those eyes held a terror that made Kalen's jaw clench. "My king," she whispered, attempting an awkward curtsy while balancing his armor. The movement made her wince, and Kalen's nostrils flared as he caught something else on the wind.
"Blood."
"Drop it," he said simply. Lyra blinked. "My king." "The armor. Drop it." Her hands trembled as she carefully set the ceremonial pieces on the ground. When she straightened, Kalen was close enough to see the sheen of perspiration on her forehead, close enough to scent the fear rolling off her in waves. "You're hurt," he stated, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm fine, Alpha King."
Just
clumsy today," she tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. Kalen's wolf snarled at the obvious lie. Around them, the training had stopped completely. Warriors, nobles, and servants alike watched with bated breath as their Alpha King confronted a lowly Omega Maid. "Show me," Kalen commanded, using just enough alpha power to make it impossible for her to refuse. "Please, my king, I don't."
"Show
me." Lyra's resistance crumbled under the weight of his authority. With shaking hands, she reached for the hem of her simple gray dress and slowly lifted it to reveal her left leg. A collective gasp rose from the watching pack members. Her leg was a canvas of purple and black bruises, some fresh, others yellowing with age. Deep gouges that could only have come from claws ran along her shin, and Kalen could see the telltale signs of repeated trauma, scars layered upon scars, wounds that had never been properly healed. The Alpha King's vision went red. His wolf exploded to the surface, and the air around them crackled with deadly power. Every wolf in the courtyard immediately dropped to one knee, baring their necks in submission. The very stones beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with his rage. "Who?" The single word came out as a growl that raised goosebumps along every arm present. Lyra quickly dropped her dress, her face flushing with shame. "No one, my king. I told you, I'm just." "Don't," his roar echoed off the castle walls. "Don't you dare lie to me again, Omega." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and she wrapped her arms around herself protectively. "Please, Alpha King, if they know I told you."
"They."
Kalen's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his roar. "How many?" When she didn't answer, he stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. This close, he could see the full extent of what had been hidden from him. Faint scars along her jaw. A slight disfiguration to her left wrist that spoke of breaks that had healed wrong. And in her eyes, the kind of haunted look that came from years of systematic abuse.
"How?"
"Many," he repeated.
The
beta's son, she whispered, her voice barely audible. And his friends.
They said.
They said someone had to keep me in line. That Omegas who got too comfortable needed reminding of their place. Beta Marcus's son. Kaelin's hands clenched into fists as pieces fell into place. Trevor Morrison, 25 years old and next in line for the beta position. A wolf Kaelin had grown up with, trusted, even considered a friend. How long? Since I turned 18, her voice broke. 7 years, my king.
7 years.
7 years of torture happening under his own roof, and he'd never known. Never scented it past the carefully applied herbs she must have used to mask the wounds. Never noticed the subtle way she flinched from touch or how she always took the longest routes through the castle to avoid certain areas. The guilt was almost as crushing as the rage. "You'll tell me their names," Kaelin said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha king. "Every single 1 inch. My king, please. They hurt you in my territory." Under my protection, his eyes blazed gold as his wolf pressed against his consciousness. "That makes it my business. Give me their names, Lyra." Something in his tone, perhaps the way he said her name, like she actually mattered, made her shoulders straighten slightly. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked him directly in the eye. Trevor Morrison, Jake Sullivan, Mike Chun, and she swallowed hard. Beta Marcus knew. He watched sometimes. The silence that followed was deafening. When Kaelin finally spoke, his voice carried across the entire courtyard with crystal clarity. "By my authority as Alpha King, I place Lyra Mason under my personal protection. Any wolf who harms her, threatens her, or even looks at her wrong will answer to me directly." He turned to face his pack, and not one of them could meet his blazing golden eyes. And to those who have already harmed her, his smile was all teeth and promised violence. "Pray to the moon goddess for mercy, because you'll find none from me." As whispers erupted throughout the watching crowd, Kaelin turned back to Lyra. She was staring at him with something like wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. "Good. Because tomorrow, everything changes." What Kaelin didn't know was that his declaration of protection was about to set in motion events that would shake his pack to its very foundations and reveal a truth about his limping Maid that would change everything. The great hall buzzed with tension as the entire Blackwood pack assembled for the evening meal. Word of the Alpha King's declaration in the training grounds had spread like wildfire, and every wolf present couldn't stop stealing glances at the small Omega who now sat at a side table instead of serving. Lyra kept her eyes fixed on her untouched plate, acutely aware that she was the only servant seated among the pack hierarchy. Her simple gray dress looked shabby against the rich fabrics worn by the nobles, and she could feel their disapproving stares like physical weight on her shoulders. At the head table, Alpha King Kaelin sat in his ornate chair, his jaw set in granite. To his right, Beta Marcus maintained his usual composed expression, though Lyra noticed his knuckles were white where he gripped his goblet. The Beta's son, Trevor, was notably absent, confined to his quarters on the Alpha King's orders. "My king," Elder Patricia spoke up, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. "Perhaps we should discuss this situation with the Omega in private council?" Kaelin's golden eyes swept the room, taking in every face, every whispered conversation that died abruptly under his gaze. "No need for privacy, Elder. My pack deserves transparency from their Alpha King." He rose from his chair, and the hall fell silent. Even the servants stopped their movements, sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. "For too long, abuse has festered in my territory," Kaelin began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Wolves under my protection have suffered, while I remained blind to their pain." Lady Victoria Ashford, a stunning blonde noble whose family controlled the southern territories, leaned forward with interest. "Surely, my king, one cannot expect you to monitor every servant's well-being personally." "You're right," Kaelin agreed, his tone deceptively calm. "Which is why I'm making a change that will ensure it never happens again." Lyra felt her stomach clench with unease. Something in his tone made her look up, and she found his eyes fixed directly on her. "Lyra Mason," he said, extending his hand toward her. "Come here." Every head in the hall turned to stare as Lyra slowly rose from her seat. Her injured leg protested each step, but she managed to cross the room without stumbling. When she reached the head table, Kaelin stepped down from the dais and took her hand in his. The simple touch sent electricity through her entire body. 7 years, Kaelin announced to the assembled pack, his fingers intertwining with hers. For 7 years, this Omega was brutalized by wolves who thought their rank gave them the right to hurt those weaker than themselves. Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the crowd. Several nobles had the grace to look ashamed, though others maintained expressions of cold indifference. "But weakness is not what I see when I look at her," Kaelin continued, raising their joined hands. "I see a survivor. I see strength that has endured unimaginable pain. I see a wolf worthy of standing at my side." The first murmur of unease started somewhere near the back of the hall. "My king," Beta Marcus interrupted smoothly. "Surely you don't mean?" "I claim Lyra Mason as my chosen mate," Kaelin declared, his voice cutting through the Beta's words like a blade. "She will be your Luna Queen." The hall erupted. Nobles shot to their feet, their carefully maintained composure shattering. Goblets crashed to the floor as wolves gestured wildly, their voices rising in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. "This is madness," Lord Geoffrey Blackthorne shouted over the chaos. "An Omega cannot lead this pack. She has no bloodline, no training." Lady Victoria's beautiful face was twisted with disgust. "How can a broken servant girl become our Luna? The pack will never accept her," another noble called out. "Our enemies will see this as weakness." Through it all, Lyra stood frozen in shock, her hand still clasped in Kaelin's. This couldn't be real. Alpha Kings didn't mate with servants. They certainly didn't mate with damaged, scarred Omegas who limped through castle corridors. "You're not serious," she whispered, the words barely audible over the uproar. Kaelin's eyes softened as he looked down at her. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. But I'm nobody. I can't even read properly. I don't know politics or—" "You know loyalty," Kaelin said firmly. "You know what it means to endure. And most importantly, you know what it feels like to be powerless. That will make you a better Luna than any of these spoiled nobles ever could." Elder Patricia banged her staff against the floor, trying to restore order. "Alpha King, with respect, this decision affects the entire pack. Perhaps time to reconsider." "There's nothing to reconsider." Kaelin's alpha power flooded the room, forcing every wolf present to bare their neck in submission. "I have chosen my mate. You will show her the respect due to your future Luna, or you will find new territory to call home." The threat hung heavy in the air. Challenging an Alpha King's mate choice was tantamount to declaring war against the pack itself. As the immediate uproar died to angry whispers, Lyra caught sight of Beta Marcus's expression. For just a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Pure, calculating hatred. "Of course, my king," the Beta said smoothly, his expression once again perfectly composed. "We live to serve our future Luna." He bowed deeply, but Lyra didn't miss how his eyes lingered on her with dark promise. "The mating ceremony will take place in 1 week," Kaelin announced. "Make your preparations accordingly." As the hall began to empty, nobles clustering in tight groups to whisper frantically among themselves, Lyra felt the weight of her new reality settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a limping maid. She was about to become the most hated Luna in pack history. What Lyra didn't know was that her elevation from servant to Luna had just painted a target on both her and Kaelin's backs, and that Beta Marcus's smile hid plans that would soon test the very foundations of their newfound bond. 3 days had passed since Kaelin's shocking declaration, and Lyra stood outside the council chamber doors, her palms sweating despite the morning chill. The ornate oak panels that had once represented a barrier she'd never dare cross now awaited her entry as the future Luna. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, smoothing down the deep blue gown Kaelin had insisted she wear. It was the finest fabric she'd ever touched, but it felt like a costume on her small frame. Beautiful, expensive, and completely wrong. The door swung open, revealing the circular chamber where the pack's elite gathered for morning council. Every conversation died instantly as 20 pairs of eyes fixed on her. The silence was so complete, she could hear her own heartbeat. Lady Lyra. Beta Marcus rose from his seat with a smile that never reached his eyes. How wonderful to have our future Luna join us. The title felt like mockery coming from his lips, but Lyra forced herself to nod graciously. Thank you, Beta Marcus. As she made her way toward the empty chair beside Kaelin's throne, a chair that had never been there before yesterday, she felt the weight of every stare. Lady Victoria sat across from her, resplendent in an emerald silk dress that perfectly complemented her golden hair. Her blue eyes raked over Lyra with undisguised contempt. My dear, Lady Victoria purred as Lyra settled into her seat. What an interesting choice of gown. Though perhaps something with longer sleeves might be more appropriate for formal council? The comment was delivered with a sweet smile, but Lyra understood the message. Her scars were visible where the three-quarter sleeves ended, pale lines that spoke of old wounds and abuse. Several other noble ladies tittered behind their fans. I think she looks lovely, Kaelin said firmly, entering the chamber with his usual commanding presence. His eyes found Lyra's immediately, and some of her tension eased at his warm smile. As the meeting progressed, Lyra tried to follow the discussions about territory disputes and trade agreements, but the political language was foreign to her. When Elder Patricia mentioned establishing diplomatic channels with the Moonstone Pact, Lyra had no idea what that meant or why everyone looked so serious. Perhaps our future Luna has thoughts on this matter? Lord Geoffrey asked with false courtesy. After all, the Moonstone Pact values traditional leadership structures. It was a trap. Lyra could see it in his smug expression, in the way other nobles leaned forward expectantly. They wanted her to reveal her ignorance, to prove she didn't belong here. Lyra began, then stopped. Heat crept up her neck as seconds ticked by in silence. What Lady Lyra means, Beta Marcus interjected smoothly, is that such delicate matters require careful consideration. Isn't that right, my lady? His rescue felt more like a public humiliation. Lyra nodded mutely, avoiding everyone's eyes as conversations resumed around her. During the brief recess, she escaped to the balcony for air. The morning sun felt good on her face, a reminder that there was a world beyond these suffocating stone walls. Struggling already? Lady Victoria's voice made her turn. The blonde noble had followed her outside, flanked by two other high-ranking she-wolves. Lady Victoria, Lyra said carefully. Oh, please, we're going to be such close friends now that you're. Elevated Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. Though I must ask, however do you plan to represent our pack to other alphas when you can barely speak in council? Lady Margaret, the beta female of the Eastern Territory, laughed coldly. Perhaps she'll charm them with her war wounds. Nothing says strong Luna like scars from losing fights with your own pack members. At least she's consistent, added Lady Catherine, her eyes cruel. Always on her knees, just in different contexts now. Lyra felt her face burn with shame, but before she could respond, all three nobles stiffened, baring their necks in sudden submission. Ladies, Kaelin's voice was deadly quiet behind her. I trust you're making my future mate feel welcome? Of course, my king. Victoria recovered first, her voice honey-sweet. We were just discussing how unique Lyra's perspective will be. So refreshing to have someone with her background advising on pack matters. The insult was wrapped in enough politeness to be deniable, but everyone present understood its meaning. I'm sure it is, Kaelin replied, his tone suggesting he understood perfectly. Perhaps you ladies should return to council. We wouldn't want to miss any important discussions about loyalty and respect. After they left, Kaelin turned to Lyra with concerned eyes. Are you all right? They're right, Lyra whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't belong here. I don't know anything about being a Luna. I can't even follow half the conversations in there. Knowledge can be learned, Kaelin said firmly, taking her face in his hands. But character cannot. You have more integrity in your smallest finger than most of them have in their entire bodies. Back inside the council chamber, Beta Marcus watched their intimate moment through the glass doors. His expression was thoughtful as he turned to Elder Thomas, who sat beside him. Troubling times ahead, don't you think? Marcus murmured quietly. The elder nodded gravely. An Alpha King's judgment can be compromised by various influences. The pack must always come first. Indeed, Marcus agreed, his voice laden with false sorrow. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. If our Alpha King cannot see past his infatuation to the damage being done to pack unity. He let the treasonous words hang in the air, watching as Elder Thomas's eyes widened slightly before the old wolf gave an almost imperceptible nod. The full moon gathering approaches, Elder Thomas whispered. Many pack leaders will be watching our situation closely. Yes, Marcus smiled, the expression cold as winter. They will indeed. And when they see weakness, he glanced toward where Kaelin and Lyra stood together on the balcony. Well, nature has a way of correcting such imbalances. As the council session ended and nobles dispersed to spread their poisonous whispers throughout the castle, none of them noticed the shadow that had been listening from the servants' corridor, or the loyal eyes that now carried the Beta's treacherous words straight to their Alpha King. 2 weeks into her Luna training, Lyra stood in the castle's grand library, staring at a leather-bound tome about pack law as if it might bite her. The ornate script swam before her eyes, each word a reminder of how far she had to climb. The territorial boundaries established during the Treaty of Silver Falls, she read aloud, her voice halting over the unfamiliar terms. Her finger traced each line, a habit that made her feel childish but was necessary for her limited reading skills. Again, commanded Madame Rousseau, the stern French wolf Kaelin had hired to tutor her. And this time, with the authority of a Luna. You sound like you're apologizing for existing. Lyra's shoulders tensed. Maybe because I am, she thought but didn't dare say aloud. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing more confidence into her voice. The territorial boundaries. Non. Madame Rousseau's writing crop slapped the desk, making Lyra jump. A Luna does not flinch. A Luna commands respect through her very presence. How can you lead a pack when you cower at the sound of leather on wood? Because leather on wood sounds like fists on flesh, Lyra's mind supplied, but she pushed the memory away. Trevor's laughter echoed in her head. Come on, Lyra, you know you deserved it. Uppity little Omega, thinking you're better than your station. I'm sorry, madam. Stop apologizing. The older woman's eyes flashed gold with frustration. Queens do not apologize for taking up space. 3 hours later, Lyra emerged from the library with a pounding headache and shaking hands. The hallway stretched before her, filled with nobles who stopped their conversations to watch her pass. She caught fragments of their whispers. Can barely read. How is she supposed to negotiate trade agreements? Stumbled through the entire genealogy lesson. Disgrace to the Luna title. That evening brought the monthly pack celebration in the Great Hall. Lyra sat beside Kaelin on the dais, wearing a stunning silver gown that made her feel like she was playing dress-up. The fabric was beautiful, but it couldn't hide what she was underneath, a broken Omega pretending to be royalty. When the traditional Luna blessing was called for, Lyra rose on trembling legs. Every eye in the hall fixed on her as she approached the ceremonial chalice filled with blessed moon water. Blessed be the moon goddess who watches over our pack, she began, her voice barely carrying past the first row. The ancient words felt foreign on her tongue, lacking the power and conviction they required. Someone in the back actually yawned. Lyra's face burned as she continued the blessing, stumbling over the formal phrasing she'd memorized only that morning. When she lifted the chalice to drink, her hands shook so badly that moonwater spilled down the front of her gown. The silence that followed was deafening. How inspiring, Lady Victoria murmured loudly enough for half the hall to hear.
Such
passion for our traditions. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd, and Lyra felt something inside her crumble. She set the chalice down with careful precision and walked back to her seat, each step an eternity under their mocking gazes. Later that night, Kaelin found her on the balcony of their shared quarters, still wearing the stained silver gown. "The blessing went well," he said gently, though they both knew it was a lie. "I'm failing," Lyra whispered without turning around. "Every day, in every way possible. I can't read their political documents fast enough. I don't understand half the customs, and I make a fool of myself every time I open my mouth in public." Kaelin moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "You've been training for 2 weeks. Some Lunas study for years before. Some Lunas weren't beaten servants who can barely write their own names." The words exploded out of her, raw and bitter. "They want me to fail, Kaelin. Every single one of them is waiting for me to prove I don't belong here." "And what do you want?" he asked quietly. Lyra closed her eyes, Trevor's voice echoing in her memory. "You'll never be anything more than what you are, Lyra. A broken little Omega who exists to serve her betters." "I want to be worthy of you," she whispered. "But I don't know how." Kaelin turned her in his arms, his golden eyes fierce with conviction. "You are worthy. Not because of what you can or cannot do, but because of who you are. The woman who endured years of abuse and never lost her kindness. The wolf who still helps elderly servants even when she can barely walk herself. The mate who worries more about failing me than about her own pain." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But what if I can't learn fast enough? What if I really am just a disgrace to the Luna title? Then we'll face it together," Kaelin said firmly. "But I believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself." That night, alone in the vast Luna chambers, Lyra stared at herself in the ornate mirror. The reflection showed a small woman in a nightgown too fine for someone like her, scars visible on her arms and legs like a roadmap of shame. "You think pretty clothes will change what you are?" Trevor's voice whispered in her mind. "You're still the same pathetic Omega who cried every time we put you in your place." She touched one of the scars on her wrist, remembering the day she'd gotten it. She'd accidentally served alpha guests before the beta family, and Trevor had made sure she understood the proper hierarchy by dragging her behind the stables. "Know your place, Omega. It's not at anyone's side. It's beneath them." Lyra sank onto the bed, overwhelming doubts crushing down on her. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between what she was and what a Luna needed to be. Maybe she really was just a limping maid playing at being a queen. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, Lyra had no idea that her struggles were being carefully watched, and that her enemies were already planning to use her apparent weakness to destroy not just her, but the Alpha King who dared to love her. The wine cellar beneath Blackwood Castle had been built for storage, not secret meetings, but its stone walls and shadowed corners made it perfect for treasonous conversations. Beta Marcus stood among the flickering candlelight, facing a carefully selected group of the pack's most influential nobles. 3 weeks, he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough to reach the assembled wolves. 3 weeks of watching our Alpha King make a mockery of everything we've built. Lord Geoffrey shifted uncomfortably. "Marcus, perhaps mockery is too strong a word." "Is it?" Marcus's eyes blazed in the candlelight. "Tell me, Geoffrey, what did the Crimson Valley Pack say when they learned our future Luna spilled blessed moon water down her dress during the ceremony? What did the Silver Creek Alpha think when he heard she can barely read a treaty document?" The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Word of Lyra's public fumbles had indeed spread to neighboring packs, and the whispers were far from kind. "Our enemies are laughing," Marcus continued, beginning to pace among them. "They see weakness where once they saw strength."
"And why?"
"Because our Alpha King has allowed his desires to cloud his judgment." Elder Patricia stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. "The king's mate choice is his right, Marcus. You walk dangerous ground." "I walk the ground of truth," Marcus replied smoothly. "Look around you. Half our nobles are considering transferring to other packs. Our trade agreements are being questioned. Alpha Morrison from the Eastern Territories actually asked me if King Kalen was suffering from some kind of mental affliction. Lady Victoria nodded vigorously. My father received 3 separate offers this week for our family to join other packs. They see us as weakened, vulnerable. And they're not wrong, Lord Blackthorn added grimly. I've been Alpha King Kalen's supporter for years, but this obsession with that broken Omega is destroying pack unity. She can't lead, she can't inspire confidence, and she certainly can't represent us to other packs. Marcus let their concerns simmer before delivering his carefully planned words. I love King Kalen like a brother. We grew up together, fought side by side, built this pack's strength together. But love sometimes means making difficult choices. What are you suggesting? Elder Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I'm suggesting that a true friend doesn't let someone he cares about destroy everything he's worked for, Marcus replied carefully. Sometimes intervention becomes necessary. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. If something were to happen to the Omega, Lady Victoria said slowly, the king might see reason, might understand that his judgment was temporarily compromised. Marcus nodded gravely. Accidents happen even in castles, especially to wolves who weren't meant for positions they cannot handle. Elder Patricia paled. Marcus, you can't possibly mean… I mean nothing, Marcus said quickly. I'm simply observing that nature has a way of correcting imbalances. If our future Luna were to no longer be a factor, King Kalen could choose a more suitable mate. Someone like Lady Victoria, perhaps, whose bloodline and training make her an obvious choice. Victoria's cheeks flushed with pleasure at the suggestion. Think about it, Marcus concluded. One small problem removed, and our pack returns to strength. Our enemies stop laughing. Our king remembers his duty to his people rather than his infatuation with a damaged servant. As the nobles dispersed one by one, each lost in their own thoughts, Marcus allowed himself a cold smile. Seeds of treason, once planted, grew quickly in fertile ground. 3 nights later, Lyra jerked awake to the sound of her bedroom door creaking open. The moonlight streaming through her windows revealed a shadow slipping inside, too large to be a servant, moving too stealthily to belong there. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she caught the glint of steel in the intruder's hand. Help! She began to scream, but the assassin was already moving, crossing the room in 3 swift strides. The knife swept down toward her throat. A tremendous crash shook the room as Kalen exploded through the balcony doors, having climbed the castle wall. His eyes blazed gold with alpha fury as he tackled the assassin, sending them both crashing into the ornate dresser. The fight was brutal but brief. Kalen's wolf was too close to the surface, his protective instincts too strong. Within moments, the assassin lay motionless on the floor, neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Are you hurt? Kalen demanded, gathering Lyra into his arms as she shook violently.
I'm
okay, she whispered, though her voice trembled. How did you know? I smelled him before he reached your hallway, Kalen said grimly, examining the dead wolf. Thank the moon goddess for small mercies. As castle guards flooded the room, Kalen studied the assassin's face. Jake Sullivan, one of Trevor's friends, one of Lyra's tormentors. But Jake was currently locked in the dungeons awaiting trial for his abuse of Lyra, which meant someone had arranged his escape specifically for this purpose. My king, Captain Hayes approached cautiously. We found this on the body. He held out a small silver pendant, the kind worn by castle servants to identify their stations. But this pendant bore a modification, a tiny wolf's head etched into the silver, the symbol of the Beta family. Kalen's blood ran cold as the implications hit him. This wasn't just an assassination attempt, it was a message. Someone wanted him to know exactly who had orchestrated Lyra's near-death. Over the next few days, Kalen watched his pack with new eyes. He noticed the meaningful glances between certain nobles, the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms, the subtle but unmistakable signs of conspiracy brewing beneath his rule. That evening, he stood alone in his study, staring out at the territory he'd sworn to protect. A soft knock made him turn as Lyra entered, still pale from her ordeal but determined. "The servants are talking," she said quietly. "They say some of the nobles are meeting in secret. They say," she swallowed hard. "They say you might have to choose between me and your crown." Kalen was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. He could send Lyra away, claim the mating bond was a mistake, restore his pack's confidence in his leadership. It would be the smart political choice. Instead, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with gentle determination. "Let them plot," he said finally. "Let them whisper and scheme and challenge my authority. But I won't abandon you, Lyra. Not for a crown, not for a pack, not for anything. Even if it costs you everything," she whispered. Kalen's golden eyes blazed with unwavering conviction. Especially then. What neither of them realized was that their enemies had anticipated exactly this response, and their next move would force Lyra to discover the truth about herself, or watch everything she loved burn around her. The training room echoed with the sound of Lyra's labored breathing as she attempted another defensive stance. Madame Rousseau had insisted that a Luna must be capable of basic self-defense, but after 2 hours of practice, Lyra's left leg was screaming in protest. "Again," Madame Rousseau commanded, her French accent sharp with impatience. "A Luna cannot show weakness, even in training." Lyra gritted her teeth and raised her arms, trying to ignore the fire shooting up her damaged leg. The limp had been getting worse lately, especially since the assassination attempt 3 days ago. The stress and sleepless nights seemed to be aggravating old injuries. "I am a Luna," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra Kalen had taught her. "I am strong. I am worthy." But as she shifted her weight, her left leg buckled completely. Lyra crashed to the training room floor with a cry of pain, her vision exploding with white-hot agony. This wasn't the usual ache she'd grown accustomed to. This was something else entirely, like molten metal poured into her bones.
Mon Dieu.
Madame Rousseau rushed to her side. "Lyra, can you hear me?" But Lyra couldn't respond. The pain was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, even worse than the worst beatings Trevor had given her. It felt like something inside her leg was trying to claw its way out. "Get the healers," Madame Rousseau shouted to a passing servant. "Get them now." Within minutes, the castle's head healer, Dr. Emma Blackstone, burst through the training room doors with her medical kit. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, known throughout the pack for her skill and discretion. "What happened?" Dr. Blackstone demanded, kneeling beside Lyra's trembling form. "She was training, then just collapsed," Madame Rousseau explained, wringing her hands. The pain seemed centered in her left leg. Dr. Blackstone began her examination, her hands glowing with a soft green light of healing magic. But as she touched Lyra's injured leg, she jerked back with a gasp.
"That's
impossible," she breathed.
what?
"What's wrong?" Madame Rousseau leaned forward anxiously. Instead of answering, Dr. Blackstone placed her hands on Lyra's leg again, this time channeling more of her healing energy. The moment her magic made contact, something extraordinary happened. Lyra's scars began to glow. Not just her leg, but every mark on her body. The claw marks on her arms, the faint bruises that never seemed to fully heal, even the nearly invisible scar along her jaw. They all pulsed with a soft, silver light that seemed to emanate from within her very bones. "Get King Kalen," Dr. Blackstone said urgently. "Get him now." By the time Kalen arrived, the glow had intensified. Lyra lay unconscious on the training room floor, her entire body radiating lunar energy like a living moonstone. "What's happening to her?" Kalen demanded, dropping to his knees beside his mate. Dr. Blackstone's face was grim as she continued her examination. "Your Majesty, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully. Has Lyra ever mentioned her childhood? Specifically, who her original alpha was before she came to serve your family?" Kalen frowned. "She said she came from a small pack up north."
Alpha.
"Alpha Thornwick, I think."
Why?
The healer's expression darkened. Alpha Jonas Thornwick. I should have known. She gestured to Lyra's glowing form. My king, these aren't just scars from abuse. This is suppression magic, dark, powerful, and very illegal. Suppression magic? Kaylin's voice was deadly quiet. Someone bound her power, Dr. Blackstone explained, her hands moving over Lyra's glowing injuries. These scars aren't from beatings, they're from magical shackles. Every mark on her body corresponds to a point where her natural abilities were chained down. Kaelin stared at his maid in shock. She has power. My king. The healer's voice was filled with awe and terror. If I'm reading these energy signatures correctly, your mate isn't just powerful, she's a lunar oracle. The words hit Kaelin like a physical blow. Lunar oracles were the stuff of legend, wolves blessed directly by the moon goddess herself. They hadn't been seen in over 2 centuries, and for good reason. Their power was so immense it could reshape the supernatural world. That's impossible, he breathed. Oracles are myths. The moon responds to her, Dr. Blackstone interrupted, pointing to the skylight above them. Though it was midday, moonlight was streaming through the glass, drawn by Lyra's unconscious call. Look at her scars, my king. Each one is placed precisely over a chakra point, designed to block the flow of lunar energy through her body. As if summoned by their conversation, Lyra's eyes suddenly snapped open, but they weren't her usual green. They blazed silver-white, filled with power that made the air around them crackle. Alpha Thornwick, she said, though her voice carried an otherworldly echo. He knew what I was from the moment I presented as Omega. The moon goddess marked me in my dreams, showed me visions of the future, whispered secrets of the packs. Kaelin reached for her hand, gasping as her power flowed into him through their mate bond. He could see flashes of her memories, a younger Lyra trying to warn her pack about an impending attack, only to be accused of witchcraft. He saw Alpha Thornwick's cruel smile as magical chains were forged into her very flesh. He said no one would believe a weak Omega's visions, Lyra continued, her voice still carrying that eerie resonance. So he made sure I really was weak. Every beating, every scar, every chain, designed to keep the oracle bound. The glow around her intensified, and suddenly her left leg straightened with a sickening crack. The limp that had defined her for years was gone, healed by the very power that had been trapped beneath damaged flesh. But suppressions can't last forever, she said, rising to her feet with fluid grace. And love, she looked directly at Kaelin, her silver eyes seeing straight into his soul. Love breaks all chains. As the otherworldly power faded and her eyes returned to their normal green, Lyra swayed slightly. Kaelin caught her, but she was no longer the broken servant who had collapsed minutes earlier. She stood straight and strong, power humming beneath her skin like a barely contained storm. My king, she whispered, her voice once again fully her own. I remember everything now. The visions, the warnings, the reason Alpha Thornwick was so afraid of me. Her eyes met his with new certainty. War is coming to our pack, and I'm the only one who can see how to win it. As Lyra's true nature was finally revealed, none of them realized that the moon goddess herself had been waiting 18 years for this moment, and that the real battle for the future of all werewolf packs was about to begin. The Great Hall had never seen such chaos. What began as an emergency pack meeting had erupted into open rebellion, with wolves shifted into their animal forms snarling and snapping at each other across the ancient stone floor. Beta Marcus stood at the center of it all, his eyes blazing gold with alpha ambition as he faced down his former king. Behind him, nearly half the pack's nobles had declared their allegiance to his cause. Stand down, Kaelin, Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority he'd always craved. Your obsession with that broken Omega has made you unfit to lead. I'm invoking the right of challenge for the good of this pack. Kaelin's wolf snarled beneath his skin, but he remained in human form, his golden eyes blazing with fury. You dare invoke pack law against your sworn alpha? Pack law demands strong leadership, Lord Geoffrey called out from Marcus's side. not a king who elevates servants above nobles and weakens us with his delusions. Lyra stood beside Kaelin's throne, her newfound power humming beneath her skin like electricity. She could see the future unfolding in fractured visions, flashes of blood, silver light, and choices that would reshape everything. "This isn't about strength," she said, stepping forward. Her voice carried clearly across the hall, no longer the whispered tones of a frightened servant. "This is about fear. You're afraid of what you can't control." Lady Victoria laughed coldly. "Listen to her. Still playing at being royal when she's nothing but a—" Her words cut off in a strangled gasp as Trevor Morrison stepped out from behind his father, flanked by Mike Chun and Jake Sullivan's replacement, Derek Walsh. The three young wolves who had tormented her for 7 years now stood before her with cruel smiles. "Hello, Lyra," Trevor said, his voice dripping with malice. "Miss us?" The sight of her abusers sent a shock of old fear through Lyra's system, but something else came with it, rage. Pure, molten rage that had been building for 18 years. "You should have stayed in your cage, little Omega," Mike taunted. "Should have remembered your place. Some lessons need repeating," Derek added, cracking his knuckles. "Seems like you forgot what happens to servants who get too comfortable." Marcus smiled coldly. "You see, Kaelin? Even now, she cowers before her betters. This is who you chose over your pack strength." But Lyra wasn't cowering. She was remembering. Every beating. Every cruel word. Every night she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering what she'd done to deserve such pain. Years of suppression magic keeping her true nature buried while they broke her spirit again and again. "You're right," Lyra said quietly, her eyes never leaving Trevor's face. "Some lessons do need repeating." The moon, though not visible through the hall's stone walls, seemed to pulse in response to her words. The air grew thick with power that made every wolf present shift nervously. "But this time," Lyra continued, her voice growing stronger, "you're going to be the ones learning." Trevor laughed. "Still think you're something special? You're just a broken little." His words died as silver light began radiating from Lyra's skin. Not the gentle glow from the training room, but something fierce and terrible, like captured lightning. The great windows of the hall suddenly blazed with moonlight, though outside the sun still shone. The moon goddess herself was answering her oracle's call. "Impossible," Marcus breathed, his face going pale. But Lyra was just getting started. 18 years of suppressed power erupted from her in waves, filling the great hall with lunar energy so pure and overwhelming that several wolves dropped to their knees instinctively. "You want to know what I am?" Lyra asked, rising into the air as moonbeams swirled around her like a silver tornado. Her voice echoed with otherworldly authority. "I am the moon's chosen. I am the oracle you tried to break. And I am done hiding." Trevor, Mike, and Derek tried to shift into their wolf forms, but Lyra's power held them frozen. She descended toward them, her feet touching the ground with deadly grace. 7 years, she said, her silver eyes blazing with divine fury. 7 years you made me believe I was nothing. 7 years you convinced me I deserved the pain. She raised her hand, and Trevor screamed as lunar energy coursed through him, not killing but purging, burning away every ounce of the cruel dominance that had defined him. "But I was never nothing," Lyra continued, turning to Mike as he fell to his knees, whimpering. "I was everything you feared. Power you couldn't control. Strength you couldn't break. Purpose you couldn't understand." Derek tried to run, but silver light wrapped around him like chains, dragging him back to face judgment. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "We didn't know." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Lyra said, her voice cutting through his pleas. "You knew I was broken, and you broke me more. You knew I was powerless, and you took pleasure in that power over me." The lunar energy pulsed once more, and all 3 of her former tormentors collapsed, alive but fundamentally changed. Their wolves whimpered inside them, their dominance stripped away, leaving them as powerless as they had once made her feel. Throughout the hall, The assembled pack watched in stunned silence as their future Luna stood surrounded by moonlight, no longer the limping servant, but a force of nature itself. Marcus tried to rally his supporters. "She's dangerous. This proves she should never." Silence. The single word from Lyra carried such authority that Marcus's mouth snapped shut involuntarily. She turned her silver gaze on him, and he saw his death reflected in those otherworldly eyes. "Your coup is over, Beta," she said simply. "As is your life." The moonlight around her pulsed once, and Marcus crumpled to the floor, his heart stopped by the very power he'd tried to suppress. As the silver radiance faded and Lyra's eyes returned to their normal green, she looked around the great hall at her pack now, by right of power and trial by combat. "Any other objections to your Luna?" she asked quietly. The silence was absolute. In that moment, watching their former servant stand victorious over the Beta who had terrorized them all, every wolf in the Great Hall understood that their pack had just witnessed the birth of the most powerful Luna in werewolf history. 1 week later, the Great Hall had been transformed for the most important ceremony in Blackwood pack history. Ancient tapestries depicting the moon goddess hung from every pillar, and thousands of white roses filled the air with their intoxicating fragrance. Representatives from allied packs had traveled from across the continent to witness what many were calling the coronation of the century. Lyra stood before her mirror in the Luna chambers, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Gone was the hunched posture of a beaten servant, replaced by the proud bearing of royalty. Her auburn hair cascaded in elegant waves over bare shoulders, and her skin seemed to glow with inner light, the permanent mark of her awakened oracle powers. The coronation gown was a masterpiece of silver silk that seemed to capture moonlight itself, flowing around her like liquid starlight. But it was her eyes that truly marked the transformation. No longer downcast with shame, they blazed with confidence and purpose. "Ready, my Luna?" Kalen appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his ceremonial armor. The love and pride in his golden eyes made her heart swell. "More than ready," Lyra replied, her voice carrying the authority that was now her birthright. "I've waited 18 years for this moment." As they made their way to the Great Hall, servants and guards alike bowed deeply, their faces filled with genuine reverence rather than the grudging obligation she'd once known. Word of her true nature had spread throughout the pack, and with it came a new understanding of what she represented. The great doors opened to reveal the packed hall. Every wolf rose to their feet as the future Luna entered, but this time the silence held respect rather than mockery. Lyra walked down the aisle with her head high, her steps confident and sure, no trace of the limp that had once defined her. At the altar waited Elder Patricia, who had somehow survived the political purge that followed Marcus's death. The old wolf's eyes held genuine warmth as she smiled at Lyra. "Dearly beloved," Elder Patricia began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, "we gather tonight not just to crown a Luna, but to witness the moon goddesses will made manifest." In the front rows, Lyra could see the faces of those who had once tormented her. Lady Victoria sat with downcast eyes, her family's status diminished after their support of Marcus's failed coup. Lord Geoffrey and his allies had bent the knee after witnessing Lyra's power, but their expressions held wariness rather than respect. Trevor Morrison sat in the very back, his eyes hollow and broken. The lunar energy that had purged his cruel dominance had left him a shell of his former self, alive, but forever changed. He could no longer meet her gaze. "Lyra Mason," Elder Patricia continued, lifting the ancient Luna crown, a circlet of silver inlaid with moonstones that had crowned pack royalty for 1,000 years. "Do you swear to protect this pack with your life, to guide them with wisdom, and to serve the moon goddess's will in all things?" "I swear it," Lyra replied, her voice ringing clear and strong. As the crown settled on her head, the moonstones began to glow with the same silver light that had marked her awakening. Gasps echoed through the hall as every wolf present felt the power radiating from their new Luna. "By the authority of the moon goddess and the ancient laws of our people," Elder Patricia declared, I crown you Luna, queen of the Blackwood Pack. May your reign bring strength, wisdom, and prosperity to all who serve under your protection." The hall erupted in cheers that shook the very foundations of the castle. As one, the entire pack dropped to their knees, not in submission, but in genuine reverence for the power that now stood before them. Kalen stepped forward, his own crown catching the light as he took Lyra's hands in his. "My Luna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My mate, my queen." Their kiss was witnessed by hundreds, but in that moment, Lyra felt as though they were the only two people in the world. When they parted, she turned to address her pack for the first time as their crowned ruler. "For 7 years," she began, her voice carrying easily through the vast hall, "I served in these very corridors as your maid. I cleaned your floors, washed your clothes, and bore your abuse in silence. Some of you saw me as less than nothing, a broken omega worthy only of your scorn." The hall was utterly silent now. "But the moon goddess sees all," Lyra continued, her silver eyes blazing with divine authority. "She saw every tear I shed, every wound I bore, every night I wondered if I would survive until dawn. And in her wisdom, she transformed that suffering into strength." She gestured to the assembled pack, her movements graceful and commanding. "I do not rule you through fear or dominance. I rule through understanding. Understanding of what it means to be powerless, to be broken, to be discarded. That understanding will make me a Luna who protects the weak, who lifts up the fallen, who ensures that no wolf in this pack suffers as I once did." Lady Victoria looked up from her seat, tears streaming down her face. "Forgive us, Luna," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Forgive what we did to you." Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, the scared servant girl she'd once been flickered across her features. "Forgiveness is earned," she said gently but firmly. "But redemption is always possible for those willing to seek it." As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Lyra stood with Kalen on the great balcony, overlooking their territory. The full moon shone overhead, bathing them both in silver light. "Any regrets?" Kalen asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Lyra smiled, leaning back against his chest as she looked out over the land that was now truly hers to protect. "Only one," she said softly. "What's that?" "That it took me so long to realize I was never the broken one." She turned in his arms, her eyes bright with love and purpose. They were. As the moon reached its zenith, Luna Queen Lyra Blackwood stood radiant in her mate's embrace, no longer the limping maid who had once served in shadows. She had risen from the ashes of abuse to claim her rightful place, not as prey, but as the most powerful Luna in werewolf history. The girl who had once believed she was nothing had become everything.